Hello.
Hello.
Wow. I'm always amazed and it works out kind of easily.
So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Yeah.
For sure.
Is my sound okay?
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
You too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Been a while since we've had a conversation.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Bit tired today. I've realized my lifetime of being a vegetarian is really caught up on me. So I'm trying to reintroduce protein, like proper good protein, but my
Mm.
system has really, it's finding it hard to digest protein. So I'm in a big histamine storm at the moment. But interesting, I did some healing work around it, and it goes back to the famine. So it's like it's a protein aversion that comes from intergenerational trauma from the famine, 6 generations back.
Okay.
So it's and in the context of Palestine and people starving today, there's the immediate trauma on the people living the experience, but there's also the generations after, and God knows how long the trauma will exist in some form or other.
Mm. Yeah, I was thinking about that in terms of, I have a friend who's, let's say, struggles with the idea of immigration, as many people are. It's a big issue, and
Yeah.
it's very easily able to quote a lot of what is represented in the press, which
Mm,
are kind of snippets of, let's say, bad things that are happening, and so much of what is happening is the result of trauma. It's the result of, we don't really take that into account, I suppose, because we haven't really dealt with it in our own lives, in our own culture.
that's it. And my sense is that it's really only very recently that Ireland has been able to confront its trauma, because for so long there's it's like the immediate the immediate time frame after a collective trauma. There's a collective paralysis, but there's also a very sensitive period. And it was like, the 6 counties were still occupied. It was such a difficult thing for the people down south to hold, all of the different energies of betrayal or even fight or flight, and kind of, okay, well, we've got the 26 counties, we'll stop now. So I think for years and generations there was a radio silence, and the same in terms of the Catholic Church taking over when Ireland achieved our independence in the 26 counties. The way that dogma infused with our constitution and our civil life
Mm.
compounded this silence. So I think, yeah, for generations, the the disconnection from our language, the visceral effect that famine still has, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations on, um, we're really only starting to confront it properly now.
Yeah.
Um, and
And even that, like, from what I know of that time period, like, there was such a good job done in colonizing us and subjugating us. Like, even in terms of the fight for independence, it was a small group of people. Like, you would have a
mm,
small group of people who would be, let's say, vocally active about what's going on in the world now.
yeah,
And a lot of other people just, they just want to keep their heads down. They want to
mm,
just put food on the table and do those
mm,
things.
mm,
So, and I think of that, the who's that American philosopher, the black American philosopher who writes so beautifully about so much of his experience as a black American. But that idea that, it's always been a small number of people who are willing to be the voice, to
That's
be the
it.
voice of change, to rise up in the face of what we
Mm,
consider normality, or what we consider the
mm,
status quo, or we
mm,
consider this is the way the world works,
mm.
and be able to go, well, hang on a second. Um, so yeah, even in terms of that metabolizing, or that digesting, or that turning toward, like I've been reading a bit of, I don't know if you've come across Francis Weller.
No.
Francis Weller has wrote a book called The Wild Edge of Grief, and he's coined this phrase called the long. You'll love this actually, called the long dark, and it's very much so. If you think about where we are in terms of our Celtic calendar, and we're in this time of Samhain, and it's the the both the death in preparation of the birth, moving into the darkness of
Yeah.
becoming still. So the long dark is what he calls, look, this is where we are as a world now. We're in the long
Mm,
dark,
mm,
and what we need to do in this time, or one of the main pieces of this time, is to listen, to learn how to
mm,
listen, to go
mm.
into, and not only to do that, but to do that in community, that we are wired to heal in community. We're not wired to heal individually.
Yes.
So that coming together, and you think about it, like I had a tooth taken out today, and I was driving home in the car, and I just burst into tears. And part of it was like, losing a tooth, and this human experience, and getting older, and just a wave of grief came over me. And I was thinking about the idea of, and this is one of the things he talks about, because he runs a lot of rituals around grief. So it's trying to normalize this idea of grieving. And like
Mm.
he'll have hundreds of people from all over the world arriving at these rituals just to cry together, just to feel together, just to grieve. And nobody's trying to fix anything, or it's just this opportunity to be human, and to acknowledge this part of, that we all carry grief in our hearts. We all carry it. And we live in a culture that has anesthetized us from that grief. We've all these
Absolutely.
different ways of just not going there. And
Mm,
yet our humanity lies in what we would often, like this idea of, when people are faced with having to go into it, this sense of, if I go there, I'll never come back.
mm,
And his
mm.
reply is, if you don't go there, you'll never come back.
Absolutely.
That we have to go into it. And I think so much of, and look, I know for me, my grief, and my access to my grief, has been the doorway into a deeper felt sense of what is happening in the world, and my
Mm,
capacity then to have an emotionality, an experience, and empathy around what is happening to people in other parts of the world,
yeah.
because they are just having this human experience that we are all having.
Mm,
And yet our culture has some way has managed to, and maybe this is the colonial piece, this is having been subjugated, that sense of, like, I often think of, the stories around Irish dancing, where they talk about one of the reasons why we kept our arms to the side was you had soldiers walking past windows. People still wanted to celebrate, but they didn't want to look like they were celebrating. So there was this,
mm,
you know, we did what we had to do to survive.
yeah.
And part of that was dumbing down our sensitivity,
Yeah.
our capacity to feel. We didn't want to feel, because if you felt, it was, so much was taken away from us, and so
Mm,
much of what it is to be a free human being was denied to us. So I suppose we did the best we could under the circumstances.
mm-hmm,
And yet, maybe where we are at the moment in the world, and what we're seeing in the world, I know for many people it brings up this sense of, I can't do anything. I can't look at it because it is so devastating. And then there
mm,
is, and we'll talk about this, this idea of how we care for ourselves in the face of what's happening in the world, and,
mm,
and how we also use it as a way
mm,
to open up more fully to our own capacity to feel, and to have an emotional life, and to play with the idea of love as a real piece
mm,
in the human experience, not
mm.
just, the logistics of A to B and food on the table and bills getting paid, which of course all that stuff needs to happen. And yet
Yeah.
there is a mystery. There is a mystery and a magic, and we're all part of something. This has always been, like, I've taught yoga for years, and that was the word yoga means to yoke, to unify.
Mm,
It's this
mm,
idea of being able to perceive the interconnectedness of it all.
mm-hmm,
And that seems to be the big invitation.
mm-hmm.
And also, I suppose, one of the big challenge of it is that there is a need for a dismantling of a certain level of perception that we tend to have gone, well, this is the way it is and this is normal. And that Western
Yeah.
idea of, how we see the world. And a lot of it is, the inherent racism, the commodification of the world, of looking at nature as, well, what can I get from it?
Mm,
The idea of even our relationship to a lot of indigenous cultures, which is
mm-hmm,
extraction.
mm-hmm.
And it takes a lot of, I think it takes a lot of grief, a lot of really leaning into, and it's like the grief is there, whether you like it or not, whether you feel
Mm-hmm.
it or not, it's there for sure. It's there.
Exactly.
There is a well of grief, be it your own grief, be it
Mm-hmm.
collective grief, ancestral grief, grief for what's happening in the world. That is all there. That's what our hearts are designed to do, to in some way, inner articulation of or movement of all of this
Mm,
debris, and how we.
absolutely. And I think grief is really the doorway. And we're in the season of Samhain now, and it's like you. I had a wave today, a wave of very low. I don't even know if you call. I couldn't even name it. It was a very low, um, kind of a dead energy. But I'm letting those waves come, and I think that is the doorway. And keening and grieving used to be a part of our well-being before colonization and before dogma and before the Catholic Church. And keening was a vocalization of that grief. And so
Mm,
instead of having it blocked and unexpressed, there
mm,
was a keener, and there was keening allowed for everybody who passed. And that was a guttural, human, animalistic expression to allow this grief, this loss to move. And then when something is moving, then flow can happen and the process can happen.
mm,
And it was also a sacred thing. So even though the expression may have been guttural, it may have been frightening to hear, it may have been unadulterated pure loss, but
mm,
the very motion, the very idea of expressing in community and having that grief witnessed
mm,
in a very sacred way
mm,
starts that process from the moment of loss. And it's not hiding, it's not masking, it's not bypassing. But keening was outlawed. Keening was we weren't allowed keen. It was taken away from us, as our language was taken away, as our connection to our higher nature through imbus was outlawed. But grief is definitely the portal. And my own personal experience of grieving really taught me that. It was like when I was debilitated with Lyme and thought I had lost everything. I had lost my means to earn a living, my ability to mother my child. Um, everything was lost. But the only way through that was to grieve it in the moment,
mm,
and in the grieving. And I spoke to you about it before. Something powerful happened, and it was like what Maureen Murdoch says in her book, The Heroine's Journey. It's like taking this descent into the darkness, into the dark goddess.
mm,
You are held, and Um, it's this way I've related to the Kailach, who is the crone of our Irish wisdom tradition, and who's been turned into the witch. But she's like the goddess of the darkness, the goddess of dying. Um, how I sense her archetype is, first I was terrified of her and I surrendered very bravely, but kind of like, oh my God, what is this ugliness I'm going to meet? That was my attitude. And then I surrendered in with that attitude and started to realize over the course of months and years, when you let yourself fall in, she meets you in a way that is so warm and
Mm.
so loving. And the poetic reference I like to put on it is, it's like I put myself in the womb of the Kailak. So it's like if I need to grieve something and if I need to let something go, that is in essence a part of me dying. But every time we allow a part of us to die, or we allow another person that's close to us to move on, and therefore making us a newer version of ourselves, allowing that death allows for a rebirth. So this idea of allowing yourself to sense this holding of the Kailak in the dark, or this, allow yourself to feel the sense of being held when you can go to that very depths. Because everybody that I've spoken to that has managed to go to those depths, and it's so difficult. I only went because I was forced. I had no
Mm.
choice. I was probably avoiding it for like 33 years before that. I've Anyone I've spoken to who has gone to that level of grief has found that they were held in this comfortable
Mm.
space. And in that holding, then we can process and we can let go and we can arise when the time is appropriate for a rebirth.
Mm.
And I think collectively that's a personal process, but that at this moment in time, that's where our world is, that's where our society is. It's this death of this patriarchy, this extractive way we've built. So we're at once death doulas to what's dying, and that's bringing out the most ugliest extinction burst of
Mm.
all the patriarchal escapades that are happening across the world. But there's also this rebirth, this simultaneous rebirth that's happening. And I think the challenge, or the call, or the blessing is to find an ability to hold both simultaneously, the
Mm.
grieving, the letting go, and the letting in.
Mm. Yeah. 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 Like there's medicine in the grief, and I suppose, you know, like even in like my father passed nearly 2 years ago, and I was really struck with the sense of fumbling in the dark around
Mm,
the process of how do we grieve this, how do we do this,
mm,
just even in terms of the logistics around it, held in such a way in which there is sacredness, because
mm.
it's that moment, one of the moments in our lives where we realize that this thing is fleeting, where we actually have to face the truth of this human condition, that it's not what we get caught up in our day to day, and end up neglecting these deep pieces that you just can't put on the table, or you can't, unless you have an opportunity to go through something very difficult. Most of us don't experience this depth within us, that is
Yeah,
that is both what you speak about, that the terribleness, like so much
yeah,
of this is orchestrated, and I think about it in terms of the alive wildness of it, and how much that
mm,
this our Western culture is just likes things in order,
mm,
like straight lines, and likes
mm,
things in order, and particularly as a man, and my own experience around the wild feminine, and how just devastating it was for that piece of me. I just went through years of really just like such an aversion to it. And
mm,
that's such a typical
mm,
piece for,
mm.
men in relation to women in particular, and how
Yeah.
men talk of women as, all those terms that we use around create, they're just crazy, or they're just this,
Mm,
or they're, and yet it's our inability to hold that space that allows for life to show up in whatever way life needs to show up, not how
yeah.
we want to mold it to a
Mm,
particular avenue, but
mm,
actually and I think that may be where we're going into. And you put up a piece, a little piece around Catherine coming in, but it was that quote from the Dalai Lama about Western women will heal this world,
Yeah.
and will save this world. And I really thought about that in terms of the four women that I ended up inviting to speak on this piece. And that wasn't initially my idea, to invite women, but I realized very quickly that
Mm,
that there are some of you who are who are taking that journey. Like
mm,
your man Francis Weller talks about the idea that the soul journey is a descent journey. The spirit is
mm,
a rising journey. And if we don't
mm.
do the descent journey, if we don't go down into the soul's journey, we don't know what our soul is yearning for. We don't know what we need to bring into the world. We don't know the possibility of what we as human beings can achieve in this world. And we don't know the depth of love that we can experience, or the
So
depth of
true.
joy or appreciation for and we're continuously then looking to, all the typical things to fill that yearning: the money,
Hmm.
the job, the keep busy, the distraction, the drugs, the drink,
Hmm.
the all of those things that are trying to fill that deep yearning for soul experience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it was in that descent that, in my Lyme descent, that actually activism found me. I never sat down and decided I was going to become an activist, or I was going to it was just, it was what you described. Something happens in that. I think it's connected to that plane of possibilities that John O'Donoghue spoke of, or like that the quantum physicists would call the quantum field, or the place before creation, where everything is possible. And when we make that descent into that dark, into that grief, into that fecund place, something happens on the causal level to align you, because your heart is so burst open, you are so unprotected, and you are so surrendered, that timelines and possibilities open. And
Mm,
if you manage to have some stream of coherence in that dark. Now, by nature, the dark is a chaos, it's a
mm,
chaos energy,
mm,
and that's what we have to surrender in. But there will be, if we have meditation, or we have love, even if we have love in our life, if it's the look in our child's eye, or a pet, or if we can hold on to one stream of coherence in that time, and keep your heart open, and say to yourself, this is fertile ground, and I am not only surrendering into the dark, I am surrendering into what is the highest possibility for my life after the rebirth. And
mm,
it's like, it's not a hope, it's kind of, it's more of a trust, and a let yourself fall on the knowing that from this, on a quantum field, possibilities open. And in my descent, the Taoiseach happened to, the scandal about the mother and baby homes just happened to fall in that time frame, which my family are a part of, and are survivors. And that sequence of synchronicity just happened, and it's been happening nonstop from then, to the point where I emerged I had a spectacular descent, and it was hell on earth, literally, for years. And I embodied the Kailak herself, I often say. But like, the rebirth was equally spectacular, terrifying, but
mm,
also I found myself fully aligned, with my dawn, or with what your soul came here to do, or what most aligns with who you are, in authentically. And that word is overused, and it annoys me now when people are authentically using it, and performing activism, and using the word authentic, and behaving in an inauthentic way, but it's when you come into the truth of who you are in that descent and in the womb of the Kailak. You just come into that truth, you set off in motion a new destiny where synchronicities can happen, cause and effect happens to put you in the line of what's right for you and where you can be of service. And I think that was key for me in that time. My intention in that time was for nothing other than to be of service and to be a voice that's to speak the truth that needed to be spoken. And I realized even in my debilitated sick state, the first generation survivors of mother and baby homes were being re-traumatized. And if they, and so many of them do stand up for themselves, but my mother she didn't want to speak. She didn't ask me to speak on her behalf, but I realized I'm second generation survivor. I'm not going to be re-traumatized from opening up this big can of worms and speaking out. It's my responsibility to do this for the generations coming after me and the generations behind me. I'm in a privileged position where I can speak where so many generations of women couldn't. And it's that sense of responsibility. And I knew I had experience in the communications world, and you have certain gifts and talents that you're born with, and you're born with them for a reason. And that was part of that responsibility I felt too. It's like, okay, well, speaking is fairly easy for me. Um, and yeah, and I think that's not just that just doesn't happen to some people. That can
Mm,
happen to everybody,
mm, mm.
you know.
Yeah, yeah. Like it seems that the suffering you experience, and like you said, you know, like I think about in terms of men, and we often hear this phrase midlife crisis, and yet the truth is it's a spiritual emergency. It's that
Mm,
soul calling for something to shift or to realign to that deeper meaning. And I think that's where right relationship is born. This idea of a felt sense of how we are connected into this mystery, into
mm,
this living experience.
mm.
And I think that's, like I see this with the men who come on the retreats. They come because there's something going on. Sometimes it's huge, sometimes it's a niggle, sometimes it's like something's off.
Mhm,
And those spaces then create the opportunity to drop into that listening, that capacity to
mm,
listen.
mm.
You could call it meditation, or there's lots of different ways of doing it. But and as we come together as a community, which again is the antithesis of what we've been told as men we should be doing. We should
Yeah.
not be sharing our emotions. We should not be showing our weakness. We should, be pitting against each other. And
Mm,
yet in that space, in that communal space, like the magic is so palpable.
mm,
Like the sense of following a golden thread is so
mm,
visceral,
mm,
and everybody leaves nourished and enriched and with a
mm.
deeper sense of how to hold what is difficult.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the big piece that a lot of us are trying to learn is how do we hold it, which
Yeah.
requires us or invites us to stay open. Because
Mm,
I think we've spent, we've come from a culture which their response to trauma has to shut down, to
yeah.
just batten the hatches and keep going.
Yeah.
And like you say, being second generation, and we're all some generation down the line of unfinished work,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and that work stays in the field. It stays there. It's like I went to an ordination of a friend of mine last night who became a priest,
Mm,
and I sat around in a room with 100 priests having dinner last night. But we had like there was these young priests, and we were having like I had great conversations with them, and we were talking about this idea of what we're carrying energetically, and what needs to be healed.
yeah.
And this guy I was chatting to, he really, really got it. Like he works in Tuam, and he said he's been there 13 months, and there's been 10 suicides in 13 months, boys and men, 10
Ah,
suicides.
boys and men.
Yeah, 10 suicides. And then lots of others from drink and drugs, and so
Mm,
it's a really, and we were talking about the idea of the unfinished business
Mm.
within
Yeah.
ourselves as individuals, but then as families, as communities, as collectives, as nations, as tribes, and then
Mm.
equally in the land, what the land is still holding on to.
Mm.
And that we can live our whole lives carrying these weights on our shoulders,
Yeah.
and maybe we get through or maybe we don't. And I think a lot of the people who reach a point at which they can't do it anymore, the people then who begin this journey of metabolizing, this journey of,
Mm.
okay, I need to work this out. I need to make sense of this. And like you say, then it's that descent into the last place in the world you want to go into.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yet that's where the answers are.
Yeah.
That's where there is ultimately there is healing, there is peace, there is amends, making amends.
There is, and that's where we find our capacity because, gee, never in a million years, even back then, in when that Lyme thing happened and my activism started, I knew I had a fairly good capacity for suffering, but never in a million years did I think that we would all be asked for the capacity to hold what we're all holding now if we're paying attention to what happened.
Mm,
But the thing about the descent is that's what gives us the capacity because the extent to which the degree to which you're able to meet your own darkness, which is your ancestors' darkness as well, from generations, the degree to which you're truly able to meet that and be in that and arise through that and from that is the degree then to which you will be able to hold and metabolize and show up in a constructive way for the collective descent as well. So I think anybody stepping on the path of activism really needs to take that descent, and it doesn't have to be a big unpredicted loss or a big trauma. You can consciously go in ritually, even with the Kailak, even in meditation,
mm,
surrendering into that descent and open your heart and open your capacity. Because what I found is, I've probably engaged with the genocide in Palestine maybe 95% on a day-to-day basis. I've had to take breaks in that
mm,
5%, but 95% every single day I bear witness.
mm,
Um, and I can do that. And people ask me, what about your mental health?
mm,
And I say, something happens when you are bearing witness with an open heart and you are bearing witness to be with another human being in their suffering, because a huge part of trauma, we're realizing now, the scientists or the psychologists are telling us, is when the trauma is not acknowledged at the point of trauma or just after, or when the person experiencing trauma doesn't have a person to
mm,
see or be or empathize. So the bearing witness has that function, but also something happens that you actually just come in more into your humanity when you are able to bear, some of the videos that I've
mm,
seen, um, torture in action and humiliation of
mm,
Palestinian men. And I don't think everyone here would have seen them all. I never in a million years thought I'd have the capacity to do that, but the capacity is increasing every day. But so too is the capacity for love
mm,
and the capacity for joy
mm,
and the capacity for beauty. It's a beauty that's far more. I'm sensing and understanding beauty and humanity in a far more embodied and present way than I've ever felt before I have been engaged in genocide to this degree, and in bearing witness to genocide in this degree. And that's a difficult thing to say because it's so contrary, or it's, to allow yourself to feel, to be able to allow yourself to feel joy when there's this degree of suffering, because a
mm,
natural instinct and empathy is to almost feel that in your own life yourself with them in solidarity, which we do. But what I've learned, and the only way I've been able to survive and the only way I've been able to show up constructively, is if I do allow myself to understand I have the increased capacity for the beauty and the grief, allow myself to feel beauty, to create, to be very grateful for all of the privileges that I do have.
Mm.
And in that way, it's kind of like an honoring of the people right now who are in the most horrendous circumstances, that we're not experiencing this privilege in a way that's individualistic, in a way that's bypassing, and in a way that's disrespectful. It's actually doing it for them because they can't. And I very often stop in a moment of gratitude and send that feeling. If it's a comfort in a shower, if it's someone's offered me a sense of dignity by smiling in a certain way or kindness, I'll send that feeling that I have to one person over in Palestine who can receive it. So there's always this connection. But I
Mm.
think that fortifies us. It fortifies us. We're allowing our humanity to expand. We're allowing our capacity to expand, and that's how I've managed to keep myself going and keep myself being able to show up. Is to allow the capacity to expand on both sides, on both ends of the spectrum, because they do and they can.
Yeah, and they will. You know,
Yeah,
they're two
yeah,
halves of the same coin. Like
mm,
one of the phrases Francis Weller uses is, "It's an apprenticeship in sorrow."
mm,
This is where elders are born, is through an apprenticeship in
yes,
sorrow.
yes,
And I think even for the the youth and the younger people coming in and seeing the world, there needs to be, and elders doesn't necessarily have to be age orientated, but
mm,
those who have felt and metabolized sorrow, who have let
mm,
it through
mm,
their system.
mm.
And then, like another example from him, he was a psychotherapist, and he talked about this woman coming in to see him, and it was the time of the first Iraqi war, and she was just devastated by it. She just couldn't, and he said he let her cry for 20 minutes, and he leaned into her, and then he said, "Have you seen the cherry blossoms in bloom?" She kind of, through her sobs, was like, "No, no, I haven't." And then he said, "Have you seen the roses outside in bloom?" And she said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "We need the roses and we need the cherry blossoms if we are to get through this.
Mm,
We need the beauty. We need to be the
absolutely.
harbingers of beauty, the creators of beauty,
Yeah,
in order to get through all of this and to make any of it make any sense."
absolutely. It's like hold on to beauty, hold on to your humanity, because the images of wanton destruction and wanton cruelty and degeneracy, they desensitize us as well. You know, they desensitize, they normalize this level of inhumanity, this level of cruelty.
Mm.
Um, and holding on to beauty, holding on to harmony, holding on to love and joy, it's a resistance. It's not airy fairy. It's not bypassy. It's resistance. And every act of creation, if I need to take a day where I'm not doing activism, I'm solely on creative or spiritual work, it's that, to me, I say to myself, this is the resistance.
Mm.
This is the antidote to degeneracy,
Mm.
creation. It's like this ecocide and genocide and this total disregard for life and for creation. Well, what's the opposite of that? Is a total respect for life,
Mm.
honoring creation. And creativity is the energy of creation. And when we get those juices flowing, then that energy can be put into how we show up with solutions. And then longer term, what kind of a world are we making for our children?
And it, in terms of our capacity to hold that sorrow, without beauty, without love, how do we hold anything? It's our opening to that beauty and to that love that
Yeah.
galvanizes us, that creates a container that is more robust, has more. And then that point you made around, and often that sense when we're at home and so far away, and what's the point and what can I do? And then what you touched there around this idea of witnessing, and witnessing is,
Mm.
beyond time and space in a sense.
Yeah.
And another, I'm going to keep talking about stories because it's the book I'm reading at the moment. But so Francis Weller started these grief rituals, and he started going to them initially, and he went to one, and he went to a second one, and nothing was coming, and he had the sense of, I know there's something in there, but I just can't. And at the third one he was in the same position. Somebody came up and put their hand on his shoulder, and he said that was it. It just broke him open. And he was on the floor sobbing all of the grief that he couldn't find on his own.
Yeah.
So that idea, of letting ourselves watch and grieve, and
Mm.
obviously we need to take care of ourselves, but
Mm.
letting ourselves watch and grieve what is happening
Mm.
in some way is a healing process for everyone. For everyone. If it's all we can do, it's all we can do.
But it's massive. I mean, even I think on like the week after the 7th of October in 2023, like I was receiving DMs from Palestinians, and all I was doing was putting up posts. That was the time where everyone was terrified to call anything a genocide, or to, because October the 7th had happened, and a lot of people hadn't even really heard of what was going on in Palestine. So me doing the tiny act of putting up posts that was seeing and bearing witness to the Palestinian side and speaking up, for why what happened, and the DMs that I received, the just the thanks, just that you do not know what this means, for someone to see and to understand, and B, for someone to speak on our behalf. And that's carried through for the 2 years, and in those moments when we feel absolutely helpless to do anything, the bearing witness is something, and it's not small. It really isn't. And when the Palestinians, or the people, it's anyone experiencing trauma, genocide, collective trauma, injustice, uh, when there's nothing else, when there's no solutions, there's no hope for, real peace on the horizon. There's no hope for self-determination. What they do have is the empathy of the Irish people, and that's something when there's nothing. And that's like a candle flame, and that heart resonance really, really accounts for something. And they'll say it time and time again, and I'm sure other activists in the space will agree, and anyone who's in contact with the people in Palestine, or Indigenous people of so-called Australia or Turtle Island, um, for their true experience to be seen and to be understood and to be felt in the heart of another human being is really something. And the mother and baby home survivors and the Magdalene Laundry survivors, that's what they didn't have, like, because of this shroud of secrecy in Ireland, and the ways to brush trauma under the carpet, um, lie about where the girls or the women would be gone, they'd be gone off to work in England or whatever. So they suffered in silence, so they did not have the ability for anybody to bear witness to their pain. And that, again, from speaking to survivors, that was as much, in some cases, that was as much of the trauma as the trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that Ram Dass quote of, we're walking each other home, and
Yeah.
sooner or later we're all going to realize that, you know.
Yeah.
That's just the way it works. And we are wired as social communal beings. We just are. We're wired to do this stuff together.
Absolutely.
And it means we need to break through a lot of, for men probably more so, in terms of, the structures, the very strong structures that keep men in their little, silent hells, living these
Mm.
lives of quiet desperation. And
Mm.
yet there's so much resource there for willing to step into it. And usually it's, I know in my own case, it's suffering. Suffering is what makes, the unknown alternative a possibility or worth trying,
Yeah,
because the status quo just isn't working. It isn't feeding
yeah,
me, isn't supporting me.
absolutely. And I think for men in Ireland now, it's a very difficult time as well, because there's this emerging from patriarchy, and the the domestic violence numbers are on the rise, which is so, at this time when so much is known and so much is understood and there are supports out there, to have domestic violence on the rise is really terrifying. But it's this, there's this, and then there's the rise of the far right, and then the violence that's being perpetrated and being, you know, really stoked. Um, there's this kind of inertia. It's very difficult for some men to know what to say and to how to show up. And if the women speak, or if survivors of domestic abuse speak, or survivors of sexual trauma speak, and they use terms like toxic masculinity, or that can be a trigger then for men, who's like, okay,
Mm,
well, we're not all toxic,
mm,
but
mm,
we're doing our best, but how? And then women will get frustrated, and it's like, okay, well, we need the men who understand what is going on, and that are open to doing some form of work to advocate, or speak from the perspective of a man, or to speak with openness. And you'll be able to say more about this, like, speak with openness around, I think we all need to have empathy for each other. And me as a woman, I'm trying to have empathy, and I'm trying to understand what it is that causes this big increase in this proliferation of domestic violence, and to hold it with some semblance of empathy and understanding, so that dialogue can happen.
mm.
But it's almost like I can't find the place to connect even with that, because it's very difficult. And I get it. It's very difficult for any man to speak, because of he may get berated on some sides. He may not be even able to vocalize.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I don't know if you have any insight.
Yeah, actually, I was listening to somebody today, a guy who works in the field of men's work, and the way he described it, and I really liked it, was we are in the time of the dismantling of the wounded masculine.
Yeah.
And like anything, like a beast that's wounded, what they do is they rear up. This is why
Yeah.
we have these caricatures of that wounded masculine running the world.
Mm,
Like that
mm,
quote of Elon Musk around the greatest weakness of the Western world is our empathy. Like
yeah.
it's phenomenal. But
Mm,
what you have to be careful with this. But what is great about it is all of this stuff has been under the surface, running the
yes.
shows and calling the shots and keeping people in their place, and
Mm,
now all of that is breaking down, and
mm,
it's happening at a time in which something within women is rising.
mm,
Some connection to some deep power is
mm,
rising, and this is the power that the masculine, that wounded masculine, has
mm,
orchestrated a lot of how the world works, to keep
mm,
subjugated, to keep them in,
mm,
keep disconnected, to
mm,
keep disempowered.
mm.
And that's breaking. Those structures are breaking. So my feeling is we're just seeing and we will continue probably for the next, I don't know how long, but for the foreseeable, we're going to see a lot more of it. But my
Mm.
feeling is it is these old structures just rearing up
Yeah,
and doing their damnedest to try to claw whatever they can.
yeah.
But ultimately, I think those that are willing to witness, and
Mm,
this is what I see in the men's group. Like our last men's retreat, a month ago or 2 months ago, we had a huge amount of men,
mm,
and up until that point, there had been, it was always difficult getting men to kind of put their hand up and come and do
mm,
this work, and we're
yeah,
doing that work so we can go into a space as men, separate
mm,
ourselves from women,
mm,
and have an honest conversation that's safe,
yeah,
because the space between us isn't really safe,
mm,
because
mm,
we've all grown up with such, such murkiness,
yeah,
generationally. So when men get to go into this space, the possibility of vulnerability, which, you know, of honesty, of saying what can't be said in other areas, and all of
Mm,
this then has the chance to come out and to be witnessed,
mm,
and so much then is healed in that witnessing because we're
mm.
recognizing we're in the same boat, we have the same struggles, and ultimately, the point is that we get then to show up with a deeper connection to that healed masculine that
Yeah.
can lead, that can protect, that can, you know, hold the light, that can hold the space. So whatever the feminine needs to do, you know, but I suppose what we're doing or what we're trying to do is to heal that relationship to our inner feminine,
Mm,
because the wound in that is, you know, is what is, it's the blueprint for the wound of the feminine in the world,
yes.
you know, and that essentially is what the wounded masculine is. It's really
Mm,
it's really their feminine that's the wounded piece, that they
mm,
haven't allowed themselves to have a relationship, a healthy relationship.
mm. Yeah.
And you know, and this is, but somebody was talking about the idea of a woman's capacity to give birth,
Mm,
and on some level there was a jealousy of that at some point,
mm,
that we as
mm,
men, we can't do that. We can't give birth.
mm.
So what are
Yeah.
we going to do? We're going to take charge. We're going to take control. We're going to create all this other stuff, you
Yeah.
know, in a vain attempt to emulate that
Yeah.
creative power,
Yeah.
as opposed to just honoring it.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah.
So we are like, you know, it's hard to see the smoke from the fire, the wood from the trees in the place we're in, and I think a lot of it it brings us back to that idea of it is a time to listen. And that
Mm,
doesn't mean you don't participate. It doesn't mean that your soul won't need you to speak up or to do whatever it needs to. But in the background, our capacity to listen, to listen, to
mm,
listen, to listen. And
mm.
that's the birthing place of right relationship, of a
Yes.
deeper sense of how we are integrated through everything, you know, how we are all part of this. And I think that's where those, like you said, where imbus arises, where ideas arise,
Mm,
where synchronicity arises, where magic
mm,
arises, that is beyond our capacity to, you know, we can have ideas about what we're going to do with our day, but
mm.
sometimes something else needs to speak,
Yeah.
and maybe our job is to facilitate that ear that can really hear those deeper places.
Mm,
That's what our world is crying out for, and why the world is so evidently sick at the moment, because
yeah.
we've just spent so long not listening to that voice, imposing something upon it,
Yes.
needing it to be a particular way so we could feel safe, so we could feel this, so we could feel powerful, so we could,
Yeah.
and all of that ultimately needs to fall apart.
Mm, absolutely. And I think that is that, the how that healing of the inner feminine can happen for men as women is that descent into grief, is
Mm,
that descent into the darkness, is ugly crying, is letting all the years of trauma that was never spoken to be felt to come up, and to do it in community. Solitude, that worked for me. Community can work too. But I think having at least one witness
mm,
has some kind of a magical effect.
yeah,
And,
definitely.
they say in quantum physics, an atom that is observed changes by the observation.
Mm,
Something happens. And I think there's another psychotherapist, Brian Thorne, I think is his name, spoke about it was the third mystical field or something, but it's just in the space of observation,
mm,
a third way can happen and a third thing can emerge. So it's allowing, if men can allow themselves to be witnessed, and women then in our process. And what happens then, according to Maureen Murdoch, who Joseph Campbell had the hero's journey, Maureen Murdoch then came in 1990 with the heroine's journey. So
mm,
that's a cycle that plots, and it's amazing, and the start there is separation from the feminine for men and women. That's the
mm,
start of the journey, that we've all
mm,
had a separation from the feminine.
mm, mm,
And actually, in my morning pages this morning, I wrote that severance. So capitalism in our world, there's just been a severance from the earth, a severance from our connection to the earth.
mm,
Through the Catholic Church and religion, there's been a severance to the mother, a severance to our bodies, because our bodies are places of shame, and to feel
mm,
pleasure is shame. So this severance from the earth, our bodies, and the mother
mm.
is such a real thing, and is probably the core wound of humanity. Because
Yeah.
when we sever all of that, we sever our wisdom, we sever our ability to resolve conflict, we sever our ability to empathize and to care.
Mm,
So that beginning of the heroine's journey in the severance of the feminine is the starting point, and then we go into the descent. When we come out of the descent, then we meet the healed masculine. So the rebirthed feminine can meet the healed masculine,
mm,
and then union happens
mm,
within in the self or within society.
mm,
Um, and I think there's an onus too on the women to heal the masculine within ourselves. And that's a process I've been working on, along with the descent and the feminine and everything.
mm,
And
mm,
I very consciously work with embodying archetypes from our lineage, like Lu and Dagda.
mm,
Actually, the work with Lou was almost instantaneous. I could not believe the healing that happened of my inner masculine, who had been stunted at 3 years of age because of trauma. My inner masculine was stunted. And I think I had worked with Lou for about 2 or 3 days. And then there was this transformation of that 3-year-old little boy who was ineffectively guarding my heart,
mm,
not knowing what to do, how to do it.
mm,
Instantly, this archetype of Lou was embodied. And that essence was now my inner masculine. And when that happened, my feminine completely flourished. And that was an instant process. The process of my feminine was years, but actually the process of healing the masculine, for me, sometimes miracles can happen in an instant. But all that to say, there is an onus on the women and men to both heal our masculine and feminine, and to come back in to relation
yeah.
with our others and with our community, and look for that sense of union, where masculine and feminine are balanced within ourselves and within society generally.
And I think often there's that piece of, that fine line of blame and responsibility,
Mm,
like I think when real healing happens, there is well, it's deeply personal, but it has this impersonal, what's the word, impersonalness to it, in
mm,
that it's not about blame.
yeah,
Like, even in terms of men and women, and and the fear women carry in their bodies as a result of wounded masculine, of men that just have not been safe,
yeah,
just
yeah,
haven't been safe. And there's a lot of sitting that men need to do around that, for sure.
mm,
For
mm,
sure.
mm,
There's a lot of ownership of that men need to do in order for that to be healed, and
mm,
for something to come through, something
mm.
healed through, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, it's this energy of blame. When there's a blame energy, it's very hard for communication to happen. If
Yeah.
there's a space for truth to be spoken, and for women or the feminine to articulate the fear that we live with, or articulate the
Mm,
consequences of the unhealthy masculine. And then equally, if there's a space for the masculine to take responsibility or accountability, and then verbalize back um, how they've been affected by the shadow feminine, because the shadow feminine it's a massive force as well in this
sure.
whole interplay. And I've had to reckon with my shadow feminine, and it's not pretty and it's not easy. But men have been um, very wounded by the shadow
Yeah.
feminine, And I think we
Uh,
can
I,
easily blame, but.
Yeah, I did I did a beautiful ceremony with a friend of mine, Karen, and we named it the apology, and it was just embodying men and women, and
Mm,
just saying what needed to be said, and it was an incredible experience,
I'd imagine.
really
Yeah.
incredible experience, you know.
Wow. Yeah. I'm getting shivers there.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even that space of listening, and that's you started with that word, listening. And it,
mm,
of course, the energy of blame. This God, there's so much happening that
mm,
we can all be forgiven for that. But for a movement to happen, if that space for listening
yeah,
is there,
yeah,
both ways, it's incredible
yeah,
what can happen. I think the
yeah,
rage turns into grief then. The
yeah,
rage on both sides can be grief, and then
yeah, yeah,
grief is
yeah.
what can be held.
Yeah. Like there was another little story Francis Weller had about being in West Africa in a tribe and noticing this woman who had a burn on her face. Um, and he said he noticed her because she had so much joy. There was just so much joy exuding from her. And he asked somebody about what happened with the burn, and they said, in a fit of rage, her mother had thrown boiling water on her. And the moment it happened, she said the tribe gathered round the little girl, and the whole tribe told her that she was loved and it wasn't her fault and that she was needed. And I
Mm,
think about so often, and so much of the work I've done and so much of Western psychology is this inclination for us to have experiences, traumatic experiences as kids and to internalize them and to blame
mm.
ourselves for them
Yes.
because there's nobody to tell us that it's not
Yeah.
our fault.
Yes.
And we spend our
Yes.
lives giving out to these wounded little
Mm.
childs we carry because they're,
Yeah.
they're acting up.
Yeah.
And yet all it is this wounded child that desperately needed someone or a community to say, you're loved. It's not your
Yes. It's
fault.
not your fault.
It's not your fault.
Yeah.
And I think that's so much of what comes up, even in the man woman thing, what comes up
Mm.
is like, men so often will just feel blamed.
Yeah.
And we're trying to learn how to work through that, how to
Yeah.
begin to recognize it's okay. It's okay to
Yes.
hear this. It's
Yes.
okay to find the part that can witness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because when the energy of blame is there, all that's happening is that little boy or that little girl it's being reinforced. It's my fault. It's my
Yeah,
fault.
yeah,
But in my own personal relationships, it's when we can engage with each other's little boy or little girl and speak with compassion
mm,
for what they did to hurt us,
yeah,
very plainly, very down the line, and ask for what we need. Um, Speaking to their little boy or girl, and to say, look, what is causing this? Why did you do this?
mm,
Are you able to heal that part of you that caused this hurt between us, or that perpetrated this hurt or whatever? Um, and again, that's the space where the rage or the anger melts
mm,
and the tears come
mm,
and the little boy is crying,
mm,
and then the little boy is witnessed
yeah,
by the loving other who
mm,
they've hurt.
mm,
And that's massive healing then
mm,
when that witnessing happens.
yeah,
And so often healing has happened from that point for me and for others that I know as well.
yeah. And our capacity to parent ourselves, like
Yes.
to realize, to really get a sense of these pieces, these internal pieces, and to learn how to hold those places. Like
Yeah.
that's a huge piece, ongoing piece for me. As I
Mm,
feel something arising that I'm aware is at this point I'm aware is coming from a wounded child, I
mm,
literally will stop and listen and
mm.
visualize myself holding, and
Yes.
almost instantly there's a melting. There's a inner thank you, you know.
I've had that experience too, that holding your inner child, and that's in that, like that Lou
Mm,
experience, that has been instant healing for me.
mm,
When I had the capacity, when I realized very
yeah.
late in life, God, you can go back and hold your inner child.
Mm,
Tell her it's not your fault. Tell her she's loved as you have. And it is instant. And the amount of damage that could be averted, the amount of hurt that can be averted, even with that, you know.
yeah.
But it's taking responsibility. It's us taking responsibility for ourselves, and then whoever we're in relationship, to have the capacity at the very least to be able to take responsibility. And when both parties trust that that can happen,
Mm,
then the space, and then the same as it's for activism, it's responsibility and the ability to respond and to try and come from that healed, held place.
yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you, Michael, as always.
Always love. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
It was a great conversation.
take care. Grow more
More.
blessings.
See you, love.